My name's Kevin Apple. I'm the chairman of Avondale Corporate. We help people buy and sell companies. We also do strategy work, so that's preparing companies for sale, acquisition integration and shareholder value work, and we do a bit of corporate funding, and we have some specialist work in employee ownership trust as well. So we're a multidisciplinary practice, and ultimately we call it mergers and acquisition strategy practice. I mean, fundamentally, if you've got significant fast-tracking growth, people will be concentrating on organic growth. You know, the organic growth initiatives will create sufficient return on investment. But as we're now facing, particularly in the West, an economic slowdown, global growth in history has been around 3.5% to 4% over the last 50, 60 years. In the last 10 years in the West, it's been 1.8, 1.9%. So when you've got that material slowdown, it's very difficult for people to get organic growth. Effectively, you end up with too many companies going after the same business. That forces people to look at consolidation and also mergers and acquisitions in order to create shareholder value. Obviously, if you're not getting organic growth, shareholder value can be best secured through acquiring companies to create return on investment. I think the other thing that we're seeing within that trend is because companies are not getting organic growth, balance sheets are growing. We call it superabundant capital, which is a lovely phrase, but fundamentally when balance sheets grow, you're not creating return for your shareholders. That forces you again to look at either share buybacks and or acquisitions. But I think also the bigger driver is the digital transformation we're seeing. Every single sector is being disrupted by the pace of change. The average business model, again 50 to 100 years ago, used to survive 25, 30, 40 years. Today that business life cycle is down to 10 years. So acquisitions is not only a very good way of creating that return on investment for shareholders, but also changing the business model in an agile way when you're under threat from the disruptive forces, and that disruption ultimately is very digital. I'm reluctant to say the digital economy because everything is digital, but the four most valuable companies in the world are all digital businesses today. So it's an important trend, and people are using acquisitions as a way of changing their business model to stay ahead of competitive factors. I mean, if you look, there's been very famous examples. So, IBM, for example, had the licensing for Microsoft in their hands. They let Bill Gates have it. They chose not to disrupt themselves. I think it's a good example of a change in business model. As a consequence, I don't think IBM are even in the top 10 of the most valuable companies today. They used to be number one. So I think being aware that technology, consumer trends, does have a significant impact on businesses today, and that those forces are changing more rapidly is making people increasingly aware that acquisitions is a requirement, and sort of the 10-year life cycle is actually just reflective of our society. From a population of 2.2 billion in 1950, we're now 7.8 billion or something. So there's a massive changes going on in humankind, and that's reflected in business. We effectively call it the four corners of strategic M&A. It's one of our little sort of icons, if you like, and each corner is, the first one is shareholder value. The second one is positive disruption. It's anticipating what your customers are going to want, putting yourself ahead of the market rather than following it, and choosing to disrupt yourself in a way that's positive to create competitive advantage. But probably the most powerful corner, if we're honest. The other one is synergy, so the ability to cross-sell between products, and then the final point is economies of scale, so cost savings, whether that's buying power or management or establishment costs. If you've got all of those four corners, then you've probably got a good acquisition to look at. But I don't think there's any doubt that the positive disruption is a major area that people are looking at. And what we're seeing today is some really quite large companies very aware that their existing business model is under threat, who are using acquisitions certainly in the sub £100 million. Our focus is the 1 to 50 million, but in the sub £100 million market, in order to create that disruption. So the good acquirers are very clear on those four corners. They are also very clear on where their business model sits today, and are aware of the trends, so that they are actually in a position where they're going, what does our customer want in the future? How do we anticipate what they're likely to want in the future? How do we place ourselves ahead of it rather than behind? And I think that's very different. The traditional mindset has been, it's all about a value play and it's all about scale. The classic of that is, RBS's acquisition of ABN AMRO. Well, it's not about that anymore. Obviously that was overpaid. Today, I think more agile acquisitions, more about the intellectual property, particularly, Shereen, for you, the people as well. What the teams that are ahead and are creating waves in the market. And I think there's an increasing awareness of that. But I think the most important one is know yourself before you presume to buy others. I think that's critical. Too many people assume it's a financial job and they haven't actually looked at their own strategy, their strengths and weaknesses, and how to acquire around that. But I think fundamentally, and bear in mind that we get the great luxury of seeing a couple of hundred companies a year, so it gives us an advantage. I think with fast change, and also increasingly what we're seeing today is compliance on top of that, I think increasingly leaders are being sucked into management, which is forcing them to look down. They're having to manage the disruptive forces all the time. I'm reluctant to use the phrase firefighting because I don't think that's fair on leaders, but some of it is. And actually, of course, what that does is that stops the free-spirited thinking about what are our customers likely to want in the future, how do we best capitalise on that. So fundamentally, in the business world, people talk about blue oceans. So that's the market where you haven't got much competition, it's a fresh field, and if you're constantly looking behind you or down, working in the business, it's almost impossible to have the innovation and agility to be ahead of the market, and you end up following it. So I call it leadership versus management. Leadership is about being ahead in a way that brings people with you, whether that's your team or your customers. Management is about making sure that it's efficient, the operations are good, and the day-to-day runs. And they are actually opposing forces, because managers often are not innovative and often resist innovation, and that's culturally a problem. We've been around the block a long time, we do a lot of deals, and we see which ones work and which ones don't, and the strategy is everything, but of course value play comes into it. We're all financial people, the Excel has to come into the equation as well, but the money is all spent on commercial due diligence. Is the business model right? What are the threats? What are the weaknesses? Legal, what are compliance issues, employment, and of course then the financial bit. And I think that's all important. You need to check that, you need to protect shareholders, but fundamentally business is about people, and it's about dynamic teams. And if you're looking at how you place yourself ahead, it's all about retaining talent and top talent. And no money is spent on understanding the different ways people think. So for us, we're great advocates in terms of our client base, certainly, of you need to do cultural due diligence. And we're actually defining what culture is. And I think we look at it and say, it's not just whether we're open-tied or not, or all of those things. It is much deeper than that. It's the way decisions are made, and it's the values and beliefs of an organisation, and therefore what is their ethos, what is yours, and are they likely to be compatible. I actually liken it to a marriage. If your values are too far apart in a marriage, you're never going to get there, and it's the same with an acquisition. Yet no money is spent on it in due diligence, which fundamentally undermines many acquisitions. I genuinely think
put some money aside to look at the equation. Of course, confidentiality is an issue. It's very difficult to get to the senior management team, but I think it's not a case of not yet. It's a case of, or not a case of no. It's not yet for many deals. So I think if a seller won't let you have access to the senior team at some point in the transaction, perhaps later, then you shouldn't do it. I think that's important. There's a phasing of the discussion, but there are some things you can do beforehand as well. I mean, if you meet the senior team, of course, in a way you're interviewing, but you're also designing that relationship. But I mean, you know, do they have a company ethos? And actually asking questions like, how often do the team meet? How often is the leadership team? You know, what's the diary like? You know, don't just look at the numbers. You know, the leadership are saying they're not that involved and the team are driving it. Well, you can check that. When was the last time they made decisions? Are they being agile? And those kinds of questions, rather than, you know, so what track record have they got in making changes and being team driven? So it really is around looking at your own ethos, know yourself before you presume to manage others, know yourself before you presume to buy others. And if you've got a certain character type, then define it and then go into the organisation and use the same matrix. And I think it is possible to do before you meet everybody and you start building that picture. Strategy is about looking ahead. It's not just a plan, it's about having 2, 3, 4 moves mapped out ahead and understanding, therefore, a deal isn't just about the money, for example. It is about how you lock the senior team in, how you bring them with them on a journey, and how you manage everybody's motivations in the equation. And I think as a consequence of that thinking, yes, we sell companies and we help people buy them, but I think people recognise that the deals that we're bringing together are higher quality and are more likely to work. So even when we're running a competitive environment for a seller, we are working with the buyers because, you know, our sort of method of being, our ethos is all about better business. We do not want to be selling companies on an acquisition basis that are not sustainable, where the transaction doesn't work. That's no good for anybody, employees, staff, customers, ex-owners, buyers. It's a disaster. So mapping that out with more professionalism is critical. You've got to get the numbers, but today it's almost a hygiene point. Corporate finance, yes, it's all about the deal structure, it's all about the model, all about legal. That's the hygiene point. What's unique, all about the people, the business plan and the strategy play for all the people concerned. We've just discussed that Avondale is strategic mergers and acquisitions, or mergers and acquisition strategy consultant. So for us, it isn't just about doing deals, it's how do we make better business. And like any organisation, we have capacity issues in terms of you know, deal advisors and making sure that they're working on the right projects, because we need to make sure they happen. So it's all about conversion, and it's all about, and the reason we won the IOD contract actually is all about conversion. We have a very, very high conversion rate. So we have what we call a client attractiveness model, and that, you know, stuff like value, but also it's the way the customer approaches us. So if they recognise that it is about the strategy as much as it is the deal value, and it's about the partnership, then it, you know, it's the right sort of project for us. If they're tackling it purely, no, it's an auction, it's top dollar, and you do what I tell you to because you're my advisor, and, you know, I just want it done, it doesn't work. We work with people that want to listen, we want to work with people that want to make a difference, and we want to work with people who understand that it's a journey. On both sides of the fence. And yes, look, on the money side, if you're buying, you've always paid too much. If you're selling, you never got enough. We understand that game. Everything else is about listening, paying attention, and working together to create a better business. And if we can't see that in the equation, then we won't get involved. I think you know, understanding those 4 corners of M&A are important, and I think within that equation, being aware that the team-driven aspect of it is critical, because if a business is too owner-driven, then it's high risk. And being aware that when I talk about team driven, I don't mean it's just run under management. I mean that the team are also agile, they are making changes, they are helping drive the growth of the business beyond the leadership team. I think that's got to be the number one tip. Number two, you've got to have your house in order, increasingly compliant world, and if you can't tick all the boxes from a compliance point of view, then you're going to struggle. There is so much money chasing acquisitions at the moment, for the reason we mentioned slow growth. There are more buyers than there are sellers, but they have to be absolutely focused on quality. And it's a corporate governance thing. I think we're all very aware that business is becoming increasingly legislated, probably appropriately. Again, Institute of Directors is a key part of sharing that story. So I think, you know, this idea that, well, it's a great business, I'm making loads of money, but I'm not going to worry about compliance and ticking all the boxes, whether it's software licenses or HR or customer contracts, just doesn't work. You've got to have that house doctoring sorted out and be able to do that. But I think the third and probably the most important in the end is leverage. If you've got a business model where you're going, we're not too sure what to do with it, we're starting to run out of steam, we're beginning to plateau, if you go into a room, you've had it. You need to be able to walk into a room and say, look, we've got a great business, we're growing, we've got a track record of team delivery growth, we can see how we can take it to the next level, it's really exciting, we're not sure that we're the right people to take it to the next level, but and as a result of that we're looking at a sale, but if the price isn't right, we're going to keep it and it's only going to get more expensive. And that's where the leverage is. So it's not just having an alternative plan, it's genuinely having a business that, you know, can be retained and taken to the next level. That creates threats for buyers, they're forced to look at it. It creates the we want, we need motivation as well.